Alright guys, so I'm actually going to demonstrate how to actually edit in Camera Raw an overexposed image and underexposed image so you get a better sense of how to create a clean edit. So I'm going to take these two example pictures into Camera Raw, and you're going to see the main screen when you pop in. So as you can see on the histogram, more of what we're dealing with is to the left. So that's showing that it's way too dark, okay, which is why it's underexposed. And if you look at this image on the right, you'll see the histogram will show more information to the right because it's way more light in this image. So I'm going to go back to the underexposed image, and I'm going to actually edit that one first. So when I'm looking at this, I need to make the decision, do I want to bring up the exposure but then also keep the integrity of the sky intact, or do I want to darken it and make it more of a silhouette? So that's the photographer decision, is to decide which way to go. So I'm actually going to expose this based on the lifeguard station, which is right here. And I'm going to bring up the exposure. And when you bring up the exposure, what happens is you lose some of the punch that's from the colors in the initial shot. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is when it's very underexposed, you're going to gain some noise in the image as well. So you have to fix that later on when you're editing. So I brought it up to about 2. And I'm also going to bring up my contrast because I want to get a little more punch in the colors that I have. And the other thing I need to look at is my temperature. So right now this photo is pretty blue, or pretty cool. So I want to warm it up a bit. And there's 2 different ways you could do it. So you can use the temperature and actually warm it up yourself manually. So you have a little more control over it. The other option is to actually use the white balance tool, which I use sometimes, not every time, but sometimes that'll help to kind of see if I'm actually changing the right white balance or fixing the white balance. So I'm looking for like the lightest part of the image, which is tough on this one to kind of tell, but I'm going to go off of the dog sign over here. That should be probably white where the dog is. So I'm going to actually make sure I'm on that. I'm going to click once with my mouse. And notice how the colors definitely changed a lot based on where I clicked. If I click somewhere else, the rest of the photo will change based on wherever I click. So again, I'm always looking for like the highlights or the white areas of the image, the whitest area that I want in the image. And now the rest of the photo has been adjusted. So this is kind of where I want to sit with this image, but then notice how my sky needs to be kind of elevated back to where it originally was. So with the skies, if you have a sky that's kind of blown out, I would definitely bring the highlights down and notice how the sky texture comes back. I can also bring a little bit of the shadows up a little bit from, if you can see kind of a difference here, from the lifeguard sign, and kind of brighten that up a bit. If I really want to be selective in my color, if I really want to adjust just the sky and I don't want to adjust the rest of the lighthouse, I can always use another tool called the adjustment brush. And that brush I can actually paint on areas that I want to darken or lighten. So I'm going to use that just to show you some options so I can actually darken this image and darken my sky kind of where it originally was and give you kind of an idea. So what I did was I used this adjustment brush, and I can make the brush smaller by using the bracket keys next to the P key on the keyboard. And I'm just literally painting on this. Now the trick with this is to make it look like it's meant to be there. Now, if you do it all the way, it's going to look pretty fake. So you got to be extremely careful with how dark you want your skies to be. And I'm going to add a little more contrast. Always use a little contrast. And like I said, the adjustment brush you can really add in areas that you want to be darker or lighter. So this is kind of where I would kind of stick with this image. The last step I would do would be to go back to the zoom tool here and take out some of the noise of the image and reduce that a little bit. This is an image from the internet, so I'm not going to completely get rid of the noise. But whenever you have an underexposed image, it's better to kind of take away some of the noise so that it's not so grainy, and then always to sharpen it a bit. So I just sharpened it a bit, and now I can save the image to my desktop. So the way that I save is just easier for me, is I put the word final, so I have the original still intact, and then I have like you can call it edited, whatever's easier for you, and I save it as a JPEG, and I make sure my quality is at 10 to 12, so it's at the highest possible. And the color space is really important because that reflects on your printing. So if we were to print out this photo, we want it to be at the sRGB mode. And then I'm ready to save it. So that one is definitely saved. And then I'm going to move on to the overexposed image. So for the overexposed image, I would kind of look at it in the same way I looked at the underexposed image. I would work at the exposure a little bit. It's overexposed, and a lot of times that's difficult to kind of bring back some of the detail. So it's better to kind of have a more underexposed picture than an overexposed picture. I'm going to bring down my exposure just a little bit so I have some detail in the sky. Notice the mountains are kind of flat on the screen, so I want to give them a little bit of pop. So I'm going to up my contrast a little bit. And then my highlights are reflected in the sky. So if I bring the highlights down, my sky comes a little bit more back to life. Okay, and notice like my settings are totally different than my underexposed image. Okay, I'm going to take my temperature because I tend to go to the warmer side when I edit, so I tend to go for warmer images. So I'm going to warm up the image. Notice I'm not going all the way over, okay, because that's a little extreme. It's just subtle, kind of adding a little bit more color to the image. I'm not going to use the adjustment tool on this image because I don't feel like I need to enhance the sky anymore. Some of the shadows I'm going to get a little bit darker when you move it to the left to kind of enhance them a little bit. And maybe bring the exposure just a tad down like that. So you have a little bit of differentiation between your shadows and your highlights. One new thing I'm going to use is, I can saturate the image a little more to get the color to kind of pop a little bit more. And then I'm ready to save again. So then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go save image. I'm going to save it where I want to. I'm just saving it currently to the desktop. I'm going to put it in a final folder of some sort later on. And then I'm going to put maximum for my quality, and then for the color space, the sRGB mode is going to be the one I'm going to be working with. So I'm going to hit save, and you can either choose to cancel, which will mean it'll close out of all your images, or you can just hit done, and what'll happen is it'll save those edits directly in Bridge. However, it won't save them directly in Photoshop or Adobe Bridge. And that's it.